Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2022 iEAR Salon, a virtual series exploring sensibilities and environmental bodies, curated by the arts graduate Colloquium of Rensselaer. This series engages with the topics of deep ecology, alternative ways of knowing, and new figurations of being in place. My name is Arma Yari, and I'm an interdisciplinary artist from Canada, currently pursuing my Ph.D. studies in Troy, New York. And I'm also curating today's event and artist talk by Jenn E Norton. Room here. Okay. So we're currently broadcasting from Arts Graduate Colloquium at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. This program is curated by myself and electronic arts PhD students. We have here Nina Isabel.
Hello.
Professor Brenda Miller. Hannah Utamura.
Hello.
John Santomiri. Ali West. This program is part of the iEAR Presents, curated by Professor Kathy High and Brenda Miller, and is sponsored by the School of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences at Rensselaer, made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the New York State Legislature. We have had artist and writer Ursula Biemann and writer and philosopher Timothy Morton over the past 2 Wednesdays. For the following 2 Wednesdays between 1 to 2 p.m., same time as today, we will have artist Jaguar Mary X, whose practice involves Black feminine, followed by new media artist Špela Petric, who works with technology and wet biomedia practices. So please check the Eventbrite page for more. And we have the link for the Eventbrite page for future events. Today, we are honored to have Jenn E Norton with us, joining from Ontario, Canada. I will share biography, and I will immersive experiential installations using interactive video, animation, augmented reality, geolocative sound, and kinetic sculpture. Often using video as a starting point within her process, her imaginative compositions use a combination of pre-cinema and contemporary display technologies while exploring the blurring boundaries of virtual and physical realms. Current research areas within Norton's practice explore the use of metaphor in physics as a conceptual genesis, communicative device, poetic practice, and demonstrative application of technological and natural phenomena. We will have some Q&A time at the end, so please feel free to use the chat to post any questions as they come up for you. So Jenn, thank you so much for being here. We're excited to see your art and hear about your insights. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to my students for bearing with me while I'm giving this talk during our post-production class here at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Today, I would like to introduce you to my practice, looking at some past works and looking at some recent works that I've been creating during my time as a PhD student at York University in Toronto, Ontario. And some of the works are quite new, just from this month. And I'm excited to share images with you, especially since it is very, very fresh. And I guess I'll share my screen. Please. Oops, sorry. This is the development of my dissertation, subtle matter, delicate bodies, and tender points in time and space. I wanted to give you an introduction to who I am, what type of inspirations I draw from, the materials I use, and the media, by showing you some of my past works. I think the earliest work that I'll show you is from 2011. My current research and my recent and ongoing projects. I wanted to set the tone by a quote from Ursula Franklin, who was a professor at University of Toronto and has since retired and passed away. She writes, or she said in a keynote engagement, speaking engagement, and in the oh, I'm sorry, I'm hearing someone. Oh, I was just hearing.
Can you switch to presenter view?
Can everyone unmute their, mute their microphones, please? Oh, can you switch to presenter mode?
Lecture, yeah. We're seeing her lecture review.
We're seeing the lecture review.
Okay.
Yes, we're still seeing her notes.
Let me just stop sharing for a moment.
Hello?
Can everyone use their microphones, please? Thank you.
Sorry, one moment, please.
That's okay.
And I'm sorry, I shared my actual keynote application rather than, are you now seeing my presenter notes?
Yes.
Or presentation?
No, we're saying the presenter mode now.
The presentation, okay, without my notes.
Yes, our presentation. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so our language is poorly suited to describe the complexity of technological interactions, the interconnectedness of many of those processes. The fact that they are so completely interrelated defies our normal push me, pull you, cause and consequence metaphors. How does one speak to something that is both fish and water, means as well as end? This is something that I read during my undergraduate degree, and it really stuck with me in ways that I couldn't fully articulate until doing my PhD later. I found that a lot of what Ursula Franklin was talking about in her book, The Real World of Technologies, was a holistic approach to technology and nature, in that they are not so disparate or distinct from one another. And I will go into this a little bit more, but first I'd like to bring you to 2011, when I first began working with interactive video. I had used sensors and that sort of thing before, but this work entitled Tesseract was the first time that I created something that was altering the way the video was seen, projected, and experienced by the user and by the audience. In this work, I was invited to a technological hub in Ontario that there was a think tank of sorts. You can't hear me?
We can hear you. I think someone just unmuted the microphone, but we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so this was a technological hub for RIM, for Google, Christie Digital Displays, which is a high-end projection and display technology company. And I was an artist in residency through Kafka, which is a festival in Kitchener, Waterloo area. And I was the first artist invited to create work for something called the Cave. And there have been caves, or they also call it the Hive, in several locations around the world. But it has been displaced mostly by virtual reality. But at this time, this was about 14 video projectors merged together. And you can see the woman who is wearing glasses, that there are these points coming off of it, and they're reflective surfaces. And there's sensors that use triangulation to locate the viewer in place. And these glasses are also stereoscopic, so the image that she is seeing, whoever the viewer is, it locates their position in the space, and everything that that wherever she is looking, wherever her gaze is directed, changes how the rest of us see the video. So I'll play a video that demonstrates this now. So I understand that that video might be playing in a staggered kind of way, as I guess that's one of the pitfalls of Zoom. But what we were seeing is people using the glasses, the stereoscopic glasses, to navigate this crystalline shape that references a tesseract. And it would change the view for everyone else. So it was creating something that was working directly with the body of the viewer. And this created a new working practice for me, or process for me, in considering the viewer's body in a direct physical way. That had an impact on not only how that user interacted with the work, but how it was experienced by others around. So I really had to think about the potential positions and interactions with the work in a way that I hadn't had to do so much, or at least that wasn't so apparent, in that you would see all their decisions in real time as they were using it. And I show this work because I feel that it has informed my practice very much, and there's a point of departure in the making of Tesseract, in that I became much more invested in the phenomenological aspects of creating installation work than I had previously. This is a work that I created that was immersive without the necessity for stereoscopic glasses or for triangulation and positioning the body in space. This work, it's quite dark. I know a lot of my artwork relies on the darkness of a room. But what's happening here is there's a chair in the center of an enclosed space. And when the viewer sits down in this chair, the chair guides the viewer by rotating physically around to follow the movement of a swimmer. And the outside of this space, there is a projection of a submerged archive. And this work was looking at the moment, or however long that moment may be in time, when we are switching from physical documents to cloud computing. So it's changing the one-to-one relationship of looking and touching and accessing information from one to an indeterminate amount of people looking at information and accessing information, and leaving a different kind of trail, an evidence of that interaction. So it was looking at the how things are maintained, how things are accessed, but also what new data is being created through the interaction of seeking information and looking at information. This work, there was 3 rooms for this exhibition. And although we're not hearing the audio for this, which I'm not prepared to troubleshoot right now, but it's a recording of Delia Derbyshire, and she has made a sound collage of people describing falling in dreams. It's a beautiful piece. I'm sure that you can find it online. There's the title, The Dreams. It's by Delia Derbyshire and Barry Bermange. And if you're not familiar with Delia Derbyshire, she worked for BBC Radio Workshop, and she co-created the Doctor Who theme song, and she is the godmother of electronic music along with Daphne Oram. Yeah, so these works were, these sculptures were rotating, and they were antiquated modes of housing information. So you have beta deck, pneumatic recorders, and other analog media that is no longer used in production houses and in broadcast. I'll just skip through this one, but here's another view of this, of the external projections. So, pardon me, I'm just going to bring down the sound for this one. Can you still hear me speak over top of the sound?
Yes, we can hear the sound.
Okay. This was a work that I was still thinking about bodies in space. And at this time, I was becoming more and more interested, more and more interested in physics and perception. Perception had become more and more important in a literal sense when I was using stereoscopic technologies. I had to think about like things like the zero parallax and like how people's eyes work and the difference between adults and children looking at my artwork, and they would not see the same image based on the size of the space between their eyes. And in this work here, when I was thinking about perception, I was thinking about the illusion of movement, and there's this figure falling or rising depending on the camera angle. In actuality, the character's not moving at all, aside from waving their arms. The way the illusion is created that she is falling or rising is done with currents of air on the fabric of the figure's clothes and the movement of a spiral staircase actually just turning. And I was very much inspired by Einstein's happiest thought, he called it, when he imagined falling from a roof. And the only difference between falling and weightlessness was this frame of reference. And the frame of reference is the passing landscape. So in this falling from the roof thought experiment, it would be seeing the grounds rising towards you. But Einstein says, if you were in an elevator, for example, and you were falling, you would be experiencing weightlessness, or the perception or the perceived weightlessness. And that's because there's no wind blowing up against you, and there's no landscape that we can see that's indicating that we're moving through space. And that's actually what's happening in the International Space Station as it's in low orbit around the Earth, is that it's continually falling. It's not zero gravity. It's just that it's in this movement where you've probably seen this when planes dive and you can experience weightlessness commercially now. So that was a very interesting concept for me in how important frame of reference is. And if you're teaching animation and someone's like, I keep making my character go very, very quickly, but it doesn't look like it is. And it's like, oh, well, you need to add some clouds or something passing by in the background. So for me, this was rich territory, especially with somebody working with light and installation and working within a virtual and physical combination of approaches when creating those interactions and installations. And at this time, I was getting more and more invested in 3D animation, and also bringing things from the real world into these animations, and experimenting with 3D printing to have this back and forth, this translation between information. And this is actually a 3D scan of my child, Edie. Edie was 8 years old or 7 years old at this time. And I had a 3D image or scan done, which happens just in a second if you have the right technology. And so this is a dome that has lots of cameras, and people get these done to get portraits of themselves printed. And it's kind of like this novelty. And I found that very fascinating, photogrammetry and the means of creating volume through a series of flat images. And in this, Edie is, it looks as though Edie is like looking at like what is real. So there's the illusions of space through these virtual reflections in this endless loop of this very short movement. It's almost like a choreography of observance. And this was just a animation exercise, but I found it somewhat compelling as far as my studio and technique is concerned. And thinking about this, bringing objects from the real world into a virtual space, I also thought about presence. And presence was something that I had been investigating in a very playful way. And I would make, in my undergraduate degree, I would make objects sound as though they had people inside of them. And I remember Chris Burden was in a locker for a while. And so I created a video installation in which a student was in a locker, and I had the audio signal from one of the audio channels from a stereo signal triggering a solenoid. So it made it like a banging sound every time it received a tone. Of course, we can't hear the tone, we can only hear the solenoid, which is like the way that your washing machine changes from modes. There's like an electromagnet that's powerful. And I took this and put it in this locker. And then there was a video, like a very old 9-inch television screen or monitor that was peering out of the air vents of this locker. And it was also, you could hear the right channel calling for help. So it was creating this like kind of silly, goofy moment. But I placed it in a basement by a holography lab, and every now and then people would hear banging and cries for help from this locker. And that was sort of like a goofy beginning for this this thread that I have followed for quite some time of presence. And in this work that you'll see here, it was my first use of augmented reality, and I wanted to bring into focus within an academic institution. You're seeing York University right now, of someone who was not allowed to be a student, but was working under oppressive circumstances all the same. And her name was Sophie Germain. If you're a mathematician, you might be familiar with Germain primes. And Sophie, which she's pictured here, this was from a work in progress moment, but she was a French girl who wanted to study physics and mathematics. But of course, during the time of the French Revolution, women were not allowed to formally study at the university. So she studied in her room, and we're seeing her naked here because her parents so very much did not want her to study in case it made her less desirable for a suitor, that they made the conditions so uncomfortable that they were hoping she would quit. So at first they took out the heat from her room so that it would be very, very cold. And they hoped that she would just go to bed. And then when that didn't work, they took away the candles. So she didn't have any light, so she would work by moonlight. And then they took away her clothes so that she would be freezing and then would hopefully just go into bed. And her parents eventually, her mother acquiesced when she found her asleep by a frozen inkwell at her desk. And quickly, Sophie Germain assumed the identity of a failing student through correspondence who was male. And when the grades improved and the student became like a star student, her professor wanted to meet her, or him, he thought. And when he did realize or come to the understanding that Mark or Matthew or whatever it was actually Sophie Germain, she was expelled. But he continued to mentor her, and she went on to figure out a great deal of things, including elasticity of surfaces, which she won a major prize for. When she went to accept the award, she didn't feel that she needed to be there in person because she was never allowed to be. So the work is called Sophie in absentia because she was always doing things from a distance and remotely. And then I made this larger work, larger series looks at other scientists and physicists working in the same type of way that Sophie Germain was. And this is, I won't go into each one, but this is Jocelyn Bell-Burnell. She discovered the first radio pulsar, and her she didn't receive the Nobel Prize for it, or at least she discovered the interference that identified the first radio pulsar. And what we're hearing is the actual radio pulsar that she discovered, but yes, her advisors got the Nobel Prize. So yes, this is a continuation of that work, and I'd love to show it all to you, but I realize that I would like to get to my current work, and this is again Sophie Germain. Maybe I'll just quickly tell you how this is working in case you're not familiar. I'm sure many of us are familiar with how, or at least the fundamentals of augmented reality. So this is image-based augmented reality. So it uses a target image and it anchors a 3D animation to that image. So I sometimes use geolocative stuff, but these ones are tied to the image themselves, and they're all composites of their actual notes from the scientists that I am referencing. Yeah, so I like that, or I aspire to create works that can be read in multiple ways. So even if you did not have the app with the mobile device, or with a mobile device with the app on it, you would perhaps be able to see like, oh, that's the schematic of a Tesla coil, or those are flight paths, or to have different ways to experience the work. And it's okay for me if somebody doesn't get all of the aspects of it. I'm drawn to work that's like that myself, and that I might not understand at all, but there's something that I find compelling. And that's a shot of the series. I'll just skip past that a little bit. And this idea of presence and bringing Sophie Germain into a space that she would have in her time not been, this would have not been made available to her. This was a little bit explored in an earlier piece that I showed a few times, in which I revisited the Fox sisters. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the Fox sisters, but they're often credited as being the first spiritualist mediums. And they have a tragic story as well, in that they were exploited as young girls. And I created like a Pepper's Ghost room where the ghosts would appear to you through a giant one-way mirror. And they were revealing the tricks that they used on first their mother and then socialites as they became more and more famous throughout the United States and Europe. Unfortunately, once they wanted to be able to come clean, nobody wanted to hear it because nobody wanted to appear to be duped. And they died penniless and to alcoholism. Sad. Anyhow, I am glossing over this one just a little bit because it's quite a far recent work. It's not recent. It's 2010. So these are just images of. It's hard to document some of my work because of the nature of how the illusion works, and Pepper's Ghost works on having two spaces and having light pass through the glass and creating like a double exposure effect. And this is, of course, a pre-cinematic technology used in phantasmagoria. And then I'm mixing it with this high definition video and animations that I created. And again, using electronics to trigger wrappings, as they called them, which would have been the way they created ghostly presence around the room. Well, they wouldn't use the electronics, of course. They did that with their voices and cracking knuckles and things. But yes, so I reimagined them as these producers of this installation. And while it was playful, it was also rooted in some pretty disturbing histories. Yes, so this is just one of the scenes that were created within that space. And as I think that Arma shared the text with you for Slipstream, this was also bringing someone from the past into our space as viewers in present day, using a combination of antiquated technologies and contemporary technologies. And what we're seeing here is a recreation of Loie Fuller's silk robes. And Loie Fuller was a choreographer, sometimes referred to as the godmother of modern dance. Sometimes that goes to someone who was in her troupe, Isadora Duncan, but she preceded Isadora Duncan. And she was ubiquitous. Her image was ubiquitous throughout French culture, then Europe, and then just of the late 19th century. She was also a filmmaker and a scientist in her own right, and held many, many patents. But she had this, because her likeness was interpreted by so many artists, illustrators, photographers, other filmmakers, and other choreographers, she almost lost, well, she did for, I would say, lost to the annals of history, in that she was so imitated that she became invisible in a way. Even some of her other inventor friends, like Thomas Edison, would recreate her likeness, but with another dancer. Loie Fuller was, in dancer terms, past her prime when she became successful. And she was also, she didn't have a tiny svelte dancerly body. She was overweight. And she was also living as an out lesbian. And she was often replaced by very feminine young dancers in her. And her inventions were constantly being recreated without acknowledgement. So she was obsessive about getting patents, and even going as far as getting her choreography patented, which had not been done before. And she really broke a lot of territory in creating that. So I created this work, Slipstream, to bring her into, because if you're not a stage designer or you haven't studied modern dance, or even in film, as she also made several films, you probably aren't familiar with her name, but you've seen her likeness in many, even like soap containers and lamps. She was just everywhere. So I recreated her dress as her medium, and adopted some of the lighting techniques that she used to focus more on the sculptural elements of her dance practice and stage design, and using mirrors to recreate her infinity room in a minimal kind of manner, not in the same way that she did on stage, within a 6-channel video installation. And instead of trying to achieve a likeness in her person, I removed the dancer completely, which I find there's a tension in this action or this gesture, in that I am removing a dancer who is performing this choreography, but it's also speaking to the erasure of her significance and her prominence within her time, or in a rear view look at her time. So this is a clip from how that would look with the dancer. And so she was always making these shapes with her silk, and took it sort of out of the spectacle of and the allure of the dancer's body, and brought it into a conceptual framework. I'm sorry, it seems that I'm missing a slide to show you what the installation looks like in terms of the mirrors on the. I will send a link in the chat maybe during the question and answer period, but it was a hexagonal use of 75-inch screens with mirrors on them, and it created, again, like a infinite regress. Maybe saying infinite regress is a little far reaching, but it would reflected it in many spaces, and mixed, again, our reflection with Chloe Fuller's robes, illuminated robes. More recent, just taking a break from looking at my past work, I've been thinking about information and going beyond, or at least not beyond, but also looking at the way information is transmitted and received in living and sentient beings, whether that be humans or plants, animals, that sort of thing. And the entanglement that we find ourselves in with our existence. And I have been working with site-specific locations with augmented reality and with public projection. And I wanted to just take a moment to read this quote from Peter Wolpen, who is, I'm sure it's like a coffee book, or a coffee table book at this point, but how there is a relationship between everything that we do and the environment around us. Nature is like the mechanism. Nature is like the mechanism of an enormous clock. Everything is neatly arranged and interconnected. Every entity has its place and function. And when I began working with plant imagery and relationships, I learned more and more about how information is transmitted through acoustics. For example, we are all learning about mycelium and how it is the largest organism, and how trees need these connections to essentially raise a community of trees, like a family of trees. And this is often when we see a sapling in the middle of a soccer field, or not a soccer field, but like in a field. And it's hard to keep an individual that is isolated alive because they're missing their parents. They're missing the sugars and the nutrients and the shade and the support systems that a community of trees can give. And this work was made for the Gardner Museum, which is a museum dedicated to clay and glass in Toronto, but every year they have a fundraiser, and they asked me to create something that resembled the Christmas tree. And I was like, I'm not really like a festive person, but here we go. So I created these trees in this forest that went through a very simple gesture, and it was between holding a hand closed and opening it as though it was offering. And I was thinking about at what point is something giving and at what point is something receiving, especially in terms of an ecosystem and symbiotic relationships. And so, yeah, they were like, we were thinking more Christmas, and I was like, this is the best I can do.
Make sure you're muted.
Pardon? Oh, just anyway, so this started a long period of me looking at smaller details about our everyday surroundings, about thinking about sentience in human and more than human ways. And I created several works that at times touch on these ideas in an imaginative way. For example, this is the Weeping Brook, where I imagined Ophelia had drowned, but she was much better off here. I don't know if you're able to see this, if it's playing every other frame or something, but anyway. And then these works that looked at the communication and behaviors of different types of flowers.
Jen, excuse me.
Yes?
We have about 7 more minutes, so I do appreciate if you maybe wrap it up in 7 minutes, if that's possible. Sure. Thank you.
So I'll bring you to this recent work. Quite loud. And work that I have done just in this past month. I'm going to skip a few things. So this is a work that I did for Nuit Blanche. And that's an all-night, for those of you who aren't familiar, that is an all-night festival with public artworks that, you set it up that day. And this work is rooted specifically at York University and about the buried water systems and the watershed of that area, and by extension, Toronto. And there was retaining water and storm ponds created here that created a huge overflow throughout Toronto, causing millions of dollars of damage. This work focuses on like the shuffling and reshuffling and rechanneling of waterways that cause the ecosystem to constantly be in flux. And our relationship to those ecosystems and kind of an endless practice of calibrating and recalibration. This imagery is a fog projection of invasive and native species of the surrounding area. Goldfish are running rampant through many buried rivers and sewer systems throughout Toronto, and I'm sure lots of North America. And there was an augmented reality component as well in this, in which we saw more of like koi, carp, Chinook salmon, and other species that would live there. This work was shown in Athens halfway through this month, and it's a geolocative audio piece that traces a buried river in Athens, and this also used to be where Plato and Socrates would teach on the banks of the river. And the audio that you're hearing is a performance and a reading of A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, in which she describes thought as represented as a fish, and she's imagining this fish beginning to swim, but she's interrupted by a scholar who chases her off the campus grounds, and the fish swims away. So it's this continuation with rivers, watersheds. This river in Athens is almost invisible, except it peeks out in the temple, in the brushes of the Temple of Zeus. And I won't play it for you because I'm aware that we have a very short amount of time. I will skip through it. Anyhow, you can listen to that work online. I think it's on my website. I'm just going to skip through. Again, I overloaded my presentation, so I will never get through it all. But I did want to get to this last work that is a collaborative work with dancers, other artists. Maybe some of you are familiar with Sherry Boyle. She's doing the art direction for this work, in which intuitive and formal understandings of like sacred geometry or the golden mean ratio, Fibonacci sequence, that sort of thing are explored. I'm sorry, I'm skipping through this.
Just as there is endless.
Here, I'll get to my. So we were exploring some of Sophie Germain.
Just as there is endless.
Sorry, I gotta skip past that.
Things happen because when the plate is vibrating,
Sorry, one moment.
What we're able to do now that was never.
Thinking that I'm getting to the right slide, but it's not playing. Thank you. Okay, this is Andrea Nan, and I worked with her around the time that I made the tree work, the gesture, and she taught me about flocking and about proprioception and sensing your room using your body, sensing your space and presence and proximity and distance through other means of perception other than our eyes. And this is Bry Webb, maybe the Constantines, and this is Dave Grennan of Joyful Joyful, which is an amazing band. You should check it out. We are creating this 6-channel work, which finds the resonant frequency of a space. So we are setting up these plates that were found in the junkyard of Dave's family's property. And we're making them interact with the dancers. And I held a residency here in Kingston this summer, where we explored some of this interaction between materials, intuitive processes, and I would just like to play a clip from the work that we did based on Sophie Germain's findings in elasticity. And I believe that will be the last clips I will play. But we were finding the resonant frequency of this space. I'm almost there, I promise. And creating a tone that vibrates the space and ourselves. The acoustics on the floor, they're shaking from the sound. They're transducers, and it has a single tone. And when calibrated in relationship to one another, they will shake and resonate with the space. As you can hear, when you approach plate, sound quality changes based on your proximity.
See what's going on here. It's really not much. All I have on each, you can go to that, it's just for later, but it's just kind of starting from there, going around, just in, these are all going, your individual inputs that are just powering whatever the speaker.
Thanks, Dave, explaining it.
But then all I am doing.
Thank you. I'm sorry that I went over time.
Thank you so much. Unmuted. You can hear me, right?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for the insightful presentation and sharing your art with us today. I would love to open it up to questions from our audience here. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat, or if you prefer, you can unmute yourself and just talk and ask your question directly. I guess while everyone is formulating their questions, I will ask the first question. I'm wondering about the historical references in your work, particularly reframing and reassessing history, such as the Mississauga people who depending on their fish relations in their life in 1750s. And you also reflect on the women, the female innovators in the field of science who were overlooked for their significant contributions in the past. And my question is, how do you think the new technology compared to the traditional and conventional mediums help us as viewers to reformulate our understanding of history?
It's interesting because I keep looking back at early technologies that made the invisible visible. And there was like a really specific period of time that I feel like is fraught with intrigue and problematics in this kind of like scientific eye, this way of looking at things. There's a historian who refers to it as the Victorian futurism, which nowadays that sounds really ridiculous, but it was a time when people were obsessed with what they understood to be the ether. So X-rays and radio waves and that sort of thing, and fluorescence and all kinds of like, at that time, burgeoning technologies that opened their imagination and understanding of the world around them, it also like infiltrated science fiction and culture. And interestingly, this was the time when the notion of the fourth dimension came up, and that's what actually like my interest with Tesseract, because we understand the fourth dimension as space-time continuum, as Einstein describes it. But preceding that, it was thought of as a higher dimensional or higher geometry, dimensional plane that we couldn't experience. And I feel like that there is an echoing or a mirroring of our time now, in which people are very much interested in like 11 dimensions in physics, and also like string theory. And I feel that having access to the infinitesimal, sorry, I'm not saying that word right, infinitesimal, is bringing this sensibility in what is there, and also our relationship to one another. So I feel like we're seeing it very much in new materialism, and in affect theory, that there's like the boundaries between ourselves is thin. It's thinner than it has been. And I feel like augmented reality in particular is a way to kind of overlap, to make overlays within not only like space in our space. So we're seeing a superimposed image that creates the illusion of 3D, but is also like, for me, a superimposed chronology. So we're able to have the past present, almost as though it's like some kind of X-ray. For instance, showing the fish that existed more. I didn't really go into detail with that, I'm sorry, because I spent way too much time on the plants. But those fish were much more plentiful, but they still exist. And actually, we had a Ph.D. marine biologist come in to use a submersible drone, and we could see the fish that we were looking at through the augmented reality app, but seeing it in real life. And it was kind of a way of saying, of like highlighting or underscoring or just making an awareness. And for me, that is like a mode of caring somehow, or like giving a moment of tenderness or care to those past wrongs. And I wouldn't say that my work is like activist work, but it's my way of drawing attention to those things. So that was a really long-winded way of saying. bringing attention to invisible phenomena, or even just things that are occluded to us because of the limitations of our eyes, or there's things in the way, obstacles. There we go.
Thank you. I don't see any questions in the chat, so maybe I just switch to our classroom here. Does anyone have any questions before we move to the private section?
I think I saw a raised hand in the audience.
Oh, did you?
Hello, that's me. If I can
Hi.
just sneak in. Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. It really was incredibly rich, and I'm sorry that we've run out of time because I'd really love to hear more about the works that you were skipping over and things like that. But you touched on so many different things that are so close to my heart and ways of thinking and areas of research. And I just have a simple question, which is kind of how do audience members react to the works? Because it's wonderful hearing you explain them and talk about them and kind of unpack them for us. And I think that would probably be completely evident, but I'm just curious, what are some ways that people garner that information, the kind of hidden, stories behind the serpentine dance and things like that? And what are some surprising ways that you found these things are effective? Your works are effective.
I really love to see people who don't know that I'm there experience the work. And I find I get the different reaction, because I spoke a little bit about trying to meet people at different levels, not levels, but like, for instance, some people might be very well versed with Loie Fuller or the Fox sisters. But I often see, like, children almost always are bananas about my work, which also kind of mirrors my my place in the world. Kids really like me, but it does have sort of like a spectacular sort of entry point, I think. The visuals and the sound when you are when experiencing my work. But I have had scientists, computer scientists, and other people approach me about my work. And sometimes that's put me into like strange and interesting moments. Like, I was invited to Google through someone who had seen my work, and they wanted me to bring a group of other artists and curators to have like this info share. And they gave us like the behind the scenes tour of Google. Then I've had, technology companies ask me to try out their stuff kind of like in a sponsorship sort of mode. And there has been times where I haven't accepted some things. I won't go into details what they are, but I have, because I have so much interest in the environment and in animals, I'm almost in conflict with my own art medium because of the implications of where those materials are sourced, how they're made, all this kind of stuff. But for my, I feel that it's broad, and not everybody will get every part of it. But I'm really okay. I'm okay with that, and I enjoy watching how different people interact with it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And oftentimes there will be some learning that happens through some, for instance, the Fox sister is very dialogue based. So it actually recounts the story. It's like, I guess, they're not all like that. Maybe some people just see the animations, but I mean, it's hard to know for sure how it's received by everybody, but maybe there's no one answer for that.
Thanks. I know it is kind of an impossible question to answer, but I would imagine it would invite people to look into those histories. So I find that really great. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question before we move to the private session. Does anyone else have any question here? Or do you want to just move to?
Sorry, like you've had this view of me the entire time, just looking up at the projection.
Okay, so
Oh, there's one question.
I'm just
from-
checking here. Oh yeah, there is a question.
As an artist.
Can you share your relationship as an artist and a teacher?
Sure. I actually worked as an artist up until I was 36. So teaching, I mean, I've always taught tons of workshops and in artist-run culture, artist-run centers. This is my first time teaching not art students, and they're lovely. I think they're great. And I actually get so much from teaching because I see people use the technology in different ways than I would, because they're trying it out for the first time, or they're bringing their own discipline to it and using it in a way that I couldn't have imagined. So I really learned so much from them. And teaching at York and teaching at Queen's is a very different experience as well. But yeah, it's they're right here. Just they're wonderful. But it's interesting teaching in an art from an art perspective in a non-art context, and it's actually how I've had to learn to broaden the way I speak about technology and about visual language.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time again.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for the next week onwards, please be sure to register for our upcoming guests to iEAR Salon, including Jaguar Mary X and Špela Petric. And if you can please leave the Zoom as we are having a private discussion session with Jenn. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you.